Ethan Lancaster stood in his immaculate garden, watching his son laugh with the gardener, wondering how a boy with his upbringing could possibly befriend a man with dirt under his nails. The pristine lawn stretched out before him, a testament to his wealth and status. Yet his son Noah seemed oblivious to it all as he knelt in the soil alongside Roberto, their gardener. "Noah." Ethan's voice cut through the air, sharp and demanding. "Come inside, now." Noah's head snapped up, his smile fading as he caught sight of his father's stern expression. He exchanged a quick glance with Roberto before reluctantly standing and brushing the dirt from his knees. "Sorry, Dad. We were just planting some new flowers. Roberto was teaching me about." "I don't care what he was teaching you," Ethan interrupted, his jaw clenching. "You have more important things to focus on than playing in the dirt with the help." Roberto kept his eyes down, methodically continuing his work as if he hadn't heard the exchange. Noah's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "He's not the help, Dad. He's our gardener, and he knows more about it." "Enough." Ethan grabbed Noah's arm, steering him towards the house. "We need to have a talk." As they entered Ethan's study, the scent of leather and polished wood enveloped them. Ethan released Noah's arm and moved behind his imposing mahogany desk, a physical barrier between them. "What were you thinking?" Ethan's voice was low, controlled, but Noah could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. "Do you have any idea how it looks when my son is out there, on his hands and knees, playing in the dirt like some common laborer?" Noah's fists clenched at his sides. "I was learning, Dad. Roberto knows so much about plants, about nature. It's interesting." Ethan scoffed. "Interesting? What's interesting is how quickly you forget everything I've taught you. We are Lancasters. We don't associate with." "With what, Dad?" "People who work for a living." Noah's voice rose, matching his father's intensity. "Roberto's a good person. He's kind and patient and he's the gardener." Ethan slammed his hand on the desk, causing Noah to flinch. "He's here to do a job, not to be your friend. You need to start thinking about your future, about the connections that will matter when you take over the business." Noah shook his head, disgust evident on his face. "Is that all you care about? Money and status? It's what allows us to live this life, Noah, the life you've grown accustomed to." Ethan's voice softened slightly, taking on a patronizing tone. "I know you're young, but it's time you started to understand how the world really works." A knock at the door interrupted their argument. Rachel, Ethan's wife, poked her head in, her brow furrowed with concern. "Everything okay in here? I could hear you from the kitchen." Ethan waved her off. "It's fine, Rachel. Just having a little chat with our son about priorities." Rachel stepped fully into the room, her eyes darting between her husband and son. "Ethan, maybe we should all take a breath." "Noah, why don't you go to your room for a bit?" Noah didn't need to be told twice. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Rachel turned to Ethan, her voice low and urgent. "What's going on? Why are you so upset about Noah spending time with Roberto?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "He needs to learn, Rachel. The world isn't some fairy tale where everyone's equal. There are expectations, appearances to maintain. He's a teenager, Ethan. He's curious about the world. Is that so wrong?" "It is when it interferes with his future." Ethan moved around the desk, pacing the room. "I've worked too hard to build this life for us. I won't let him throw it away because he's fascinated by some gardener's stories." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Roberto is more than just some gardener, Ethan. He's been with us for years. He's practically part of the family." Ethan stopped pacing, turning to face his wife. "That's exactly the problem. We've let him get too close. It's time to set some boundaries." Outside, Roberto continued his work, seemingly oblivious to the drama unfolding inside the house. But as Noah stormed out onto the patio, slamming the door behind him, Roberto's hands stilled for a moment. "You okay, Mijo?" he asked softly, not looking up from the flower bed. Noah dropped onto a nearby bench, his shoulders slumped. "I don't understand him, Roberto. Why does he have to be like this?" Roberto sat back on his heels, studying the young man before him. Your father. He sees the world in a certain way. It's not easy for him to change that view. But it's not right. Noah's voice cracked with emotion. The way he talks about you, about people who work for us. It's like he doesn't even see you as a person. Roberto's eyes softened with understanding. Sometimes, people build walls around themselves. They think it makes them strong, but really, it just keeps them from seeing the beauty in the world around them. Noah looked at Roberto, really looked at him for the first time that day. The man's hands were calloused and dirt-stained, but his eyes held a wisdom that seemed at odds with his humble appearance. How do you do it, Roberto? How do you stay so calm when people treat you like you're less than them? Roberto smiled, a small, secretive quirk of his lips. I know who I am, Noah. That's something no one can take away from me. As they talked, neither noticed Rachel watching from the window, a troubled expression on her face. She turned away, heading back to Ethan's study with determination in her step. Ethan, we need to talk about this, she said as she entered the room. You can't keep pushing Noah like this. He's his own person, with his own interests and values. Ethan looked up from his desk, irritation flashing across his face. I'm trying to prepare him for the real world, Rachel. A world that doesn't care about your feelings or your gardening hobbies. Rachel's patience snapped. And what about your feelings, Ethan? What are you so afraid of? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Ethan's jaw worked silently for a moment before he spoke, his voice low and tight. I'm afraid of him making the same mistakes I did, of thinking the world owes him something just because he's passionate about it. Rachel's expression softened. She moved around the desk, placing a hand on her husband's shoulder. Noah isn't you, Ethan, and your past doesn't have to dictate his future. Ethan shrugged off her touch, standing abruptly. I need some air. As he strode out of the study, he nearly collided with Noah, who was heading back inside. The two stared at each other for a moment, the air thick with tension. I won't stop being friends with Roberto, Noah said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He's a good person, and I'm learning a lot from him. Ethan's eyes hardened. This isn't a negotiation, Noah. You will do as I say, or there will be consequences. No more time with the gardener. Is that clear? Noah's chin lifted defiantly. Crystal clear, Dad. But you're wrong about this. About everything. As Noah brushed past him, Ethan felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. Pride in his son's strength, anger at his defiance, or perhaps, buried deep beneath layers of stubbornness and fear, a tiny seed of doubt. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Noah crept out to the garden shed. He'd seen Roberto storing something there earlier, and curiosity gnawed at him. As he rummaged through the neatly organized tools and supplies, his hand brushed against something unexpected, a book. Pulling it out, Noah's eyes widened as he read the title, Advanced Theories in Economic Development. But was the name inscribed inside the cover that made his heart race. Property of Roberto Mendez, Ph.D. The sound of footsteps outside made Noah jump. He quickly shoved the book back into its hiding place and slipped out of the shed, his mind reeling with questions. As he rounded the corner, he nearly ran into Roberto, who was carrying a stack of empty flower pots. Whoa there, Mijo, Roberto chuckled, steadying Noah with one hand. What's got you in such a hurry? Noah opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. Roberto's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something, worry, fear, passing across his face. Is everything okay, Noah? He asked, his voice gentle but guarded. Before Noah could respond, Ethan's voice boomed across the garden. Noah, I thought I made myself clear earlier. Get inside now. Roberto's expression closed off, becoming the mask of the humble gardener once more. You should go, Noah. We don't want to cause any more trouble. As Noah reluctantly headed back to the house, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was far more to Roberto than met the eye. And somehow, he knew that uncovering those secrets would change everything. Inside, Ethan paced the living room, his face a storm of emotions. I won't have this in my house, Noah. I won't have you throwing away your future for some misguided notion of equality." Noah's fists clenched at his sides. "You don't even know him, Dad. You don't know anything about Roberto or what he's capable of." "I know enough," Ethan snapped. "I know that he's filling your head with ideas that will only hold you back in life." Rachel stepped between them, her voice tight with frustration. "Both of you, stop this. We're family. We should be able to talk about this without—" "There's nothing to talk about," Ethan interrupted. "Noah will do as he's told, or he'll face the consequences. End of discussion." As Noah stormed off to his room, slamming the door behind him, Rachel turned to her husband with fire in her eyes. "This isn't over, Ethan. You can't keep pushing him away like this." Ethan's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. "What would you have me do, Rachel? Let him throw away everything we've built?" Rachel's voice softened. "Maybe it's time we started building something new, something based on more than just money and status." Outside, Roberto stood in the shadows of the garden, listening to the muffled argument from inside the house. His face was a mask of conflicting emotions, guilt, fear, and a deep, abiding sadness. As the voices inside rose and fell, Roberto made a decision. He pulled out his phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. "Miguel, it's me. We need to talk. It's time." As he hung up, Roberto's eyes drifted to the Lancaster house, where the lights blazed in defiance of the encroaching night. Whatever came next, he knew that the carefully constructed world of the Lancasters and his own hidden past was about to be turned upside down. And as the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Roberto whispered a quiet prayer for strength, for wisdom, and for the courage to face the storm that was surely coming. Ethan Lancaster's fingers flew across the keyboard, his eyes narrowed in concentration. The soft glow of the computer screen illuminated his face in the darkened study, casting deep shadows that accentuated the lines of frustration etched around his mouth. "Roberto Mendez," he muttered, typing the name into yet another search engine. "Who are you really?" Hours ticked by, each fruitless search only fueling Ethan's determination. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, he slammed his laptop shut, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Nothing. How is that possible? The sound of footsteps in the hallway jolted him from his thoughts. Noah's voice drifted through the door, followed by a softer reply, "Roberto." Ethan's jaw clenched as he listened to their easy banter, a stark contrast to the tense silence that had fallen between him and his son. Outside, Noah helped Roberto load tools into the gardening truck. "Are you sure you can't tell me where you're going?" Noah asked, his voice tinged with concern. Roberto's weathered face creased into a gentle smile. "Just some personal business, Mijo. Nothing for you to worry about." As Roberto drove away, Noah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He turned to head back inside, only to find his father standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "I thought I made myself clear about spending time with the help." Ethan's voice was cold, cutting through the morning air. Noah's shoulders tensed. "I thought I made myself clear that I don't care what you think about it." Father and son stared each other down, the air between them crackling with unspoken anger and hurt. It was Rachel who finally broke the standoff, her voice sharp with exasperation. "Enough, both of you. Ethan, you have that meeting with Victor Delgado. Noah, you're going to be late for school." As Noah brushed past him, Ethan caught a whiff of soil and greenery, the scent of the garden clinging to his son's clothes. Something inside him twisted, a mixture of anger and an emotion he couldn't quite name. The sleek interior of Ethan's car did little to calm his nerves as he drove to the meeting. Victor Delgado was more than just a business rival. He was a shark circling for blood, always looking for weakness. And right now, Ethan felt more vulnerable than he had in years. Victor's smile was all teeth as Ethan entered the conference room. "Ethan, my friend, so good of you to join us. I trust everything is well with your family." The pause was slight, but deliberate. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "My family is none of your concern, Victor. Let's talk business." As the meeting progressed, Ethan found his mind wandering. Victor's words blurred into a hum of market shares and profit margins, But all Ethan could think about was the growing chasm between him and Noah, and the mysterious gardener at the center of it all. "Are you listening, Ethan?" Victor's voice cut through his thoughts. This deal could change everything. For both of us. Ethan blinked, refocusing on the man across the table. There was something in Victor's eyes, a glint of triumph, as if he knew something Ethan didn't. "I'm listening," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the unease coiling in his gut. "But I'm not convinced. This deal seems too good to be true." Victor's smile widened, predatory. "Oh, Ethan, you have no idea how true it could be." As Ethan left the meeting, his phone buzzed with a text from Noah. "Won't be home for dinner. Studying with a friend." Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He knew, without a doubt, that studying meant spending more time with Roberto. The familiar anger rose in his chest, but beneath it lurked something else, a growing fear that he was losing his son. Back at the Lancaster estate, Roberto knelt in the garden, his hands working the soil with practiced ease. But his mind was far away, lost in memories of a life long buried. The crunch of gravel announced Rachel's approach. "Roberto, there's a letter for you." He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "A letter? For me?" Rachel handed him the envelope, her eyes searching his face. "Is everything all right, Roberto? You've seemed distracted lately." Roberto's fingers trembled slightly as he took the letter. "Everything is fine, Mrs. Lancaster. Thank you for your concern." As Rachel walked away, Roberto tore open the envelope, his heart pounding. The familiar handwriting leapt out at him. "Roberto, they know. We need to talk. Miguel." The world seemed to tilt beneath Roberto's feet. He crumpled the letter in his fist, years of carefully constructed peace threatening to unravel in an instant. Unbeknownst to Roberto, Noah had witnessed the exchange from his bedroom window. The look of shock and fear on Roberto's face only deepened the mystery surrounding the gentle gardener. As evening fell, Ethan returned home, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. The house was quiet, too quiet. He found Rachel in the kitchen, her face tight with worry. "Noah's not home yet," she said before he could ask. And Roberto left early, said he had some personal business to attend to. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. "This has gone on long enough. I want answers, Rachel, and I'm going to get them." Rachel reached out, her hand on his arm. "Ethan, please. Maybe it's time we talked about what's really bothering you. This isn't just about Noah and Roberto, is it?" For a moment, Ethan's mask slipped, revealing a glimpse of the turmoil beneath. But then the walls slammed back into place. "I don't know what you're talking about," he snapped, pulling away. "I'm going to find our son." As Ethan stormed out, Rachel sighed, her shoulders sagging with the weight of unspoken truths. Across town, Noah sat in a small cafe, his head bent close to a girl with dark, curly hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. "So, your dad works with my dad?" Noah asked, his voice low. Sofia Delgado nodded, a wry smile twisting her lips. "If by works with you mean is constantly trying to outmaneuver and destroy, then yes." Noah's brow furrowed. "And you're sure you heard something about Roberto, our gardener?" Sofia's eyes glinted with curiosity. "Just snippets. Something about a professor from South America, political refugees." "Why? What's going on, Noah?" Before Noah could respond, the cafe door burst open. Ethan stood there, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "Noah, home, now." The drive back to the Lancaster estate was thick with tension. Noah stared out the window, his jaw set in defiance. Ethan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Who's that girl?" Ethan finally broke the silence. Noah's voice was flat. "A friend." "A friend?" Ethan's laugh was harsh. "Do you have any idea who she is?" "That's Victor Delgado's daughter. What were you thinking?" Noah turned to face his father, anger flashing in his eyes. "I was thinking that maybe, just maybe, there's more to people than their last name or how much money they have. But you wouldn't understand that, would you?" The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. For a moment, He saw himself through his son's eyes, cold, judgmental, obsessed with status. The realization stung more than he cared to admit. As they pulled into the driveway, Roberto's truck was just leaving. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he caught a glimpse of the gardener's face. Troubled, almost haunted. "That's it," Ethan muttered. "I'm getting to the bottom of this." He stormed across the lawn, ignoring Noah's protests. Roberto had just finished loading some personal items into his truck when Ethan reached him. "We need to talk." Ethan's voice was low, dangerous. "Now." Roberto straightened, his usual calm demeanor tinged with wariness. "Mr. Lancaster, I was just leaving for the day. Perhaps we could speak tomorrow." Ethan stepped closer, invading Roberto's space. No more deflections. No more secrets. "Who are you really, Roberto? And what are you doing to my family?" For a moment, something flashed in Roberto's eyes, a glimpse of steel beneath the humble exterior. "I am who I've always been, Mr. Lancaster. A man trying to live a peaceful life and share what wisdom I can." Ethan's laugh was bitter. "Wisdom? You're a gardener. What could you possibly teach my son that I can't?" Roberto's voice was soft, but there was an undercurrent of strength that made Ethan pause. "Perhaps the very things you've forgotten, Mr. Lancaster. The value of hard work, of connecting with the earth, of seeing the beauty in simple things." "You're filling his head with nonsense," Ethan snarled, his control slipping, distracting him from what's really important. "And what is that, Mr. Lancaster?" Roberto's gaze was steady, challenging. "Money, pal. Or perhaps the love and respect of your son." Ethan's fist clenched at his side, trembling with the effort of restraint. For a heartbeat, violence hung in the air between them. But it was Roberto who broke the tension, stepping back with a sad shake of his head. "I mean you and your family no harm, Mr. Lancaster. But perhaps it's time you looked closely at what truly matters in life." As Roberto drove away, Ethan stood rooted to the spot, his certainties crumbling around him. From the house, Noah and Rachel watched, their faces mirroring the conflict etched on Ethan's features. Later that night, as the Lancaster household settled into an uneasy silence, Ethan sat alone in his study. His computer screen glowed with the fruits of his investigation, fragments of a life he never could have imagined. "Professor Roberto Mendez," he murmured, scrolling through academic papers and news articles. "Renowned economist, political refugee." The pieces were falling into place, but instead of triumph, Ethan felt a growing sense of unease. He had been so sure, so certain of his place in the world. But now, a soft knock at the door startled him. Rachel entered, her face a mixture of concern and resolve. "Ethan," she said quietly, "we need to talk. About Roberto. About everything." As Rachel began to speak, Ethan felt the foundations of his carefully constructed world begin to shift. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, he had been wrong about more than just the gardener. Ethan Lancaster's world was unraveling thread by thread. The carefully woven tapestry of his life, his business empire, his family, his very identity, was coming apart at the seams. And at the center of it all stood Roberto Mendez, the unassuming gardener who had turned out to be so much more. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ethan's study as he pored over the documents scattered across his desk. Academic papers, news clippings, and grainy photographs painted a picture of a life he could scarcely comprehend. Professor Roberto Mendez, economist, political activist, refugee. A soft knock at the door jolted Ethan from his thoughts. Rachel entered, her face a mask of concern and resolve. "We need to talk, Ethan. About Roberto. About everything." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You knew, didn't you? All this time, you knew who he really was." Rachel's silence was answer enough. Ethan's fist came down hard on the desk, sending papers fluttering to the floor. "How could you keep this from me? Our son is out there, being influenced by a man we know nothing about." Rachel's eyes flashed. "We know everything about him, Ethan. We know he's kind, wise, and has taught Noah more about life in a few months than you have in years." The words stung, but Ethan pushed the pain aside. That's not the point. He lied to us. He's been lying this whole time. He didn't lie. Rachel's voice was soft but firm. He simply chose not to share a past that brought him nothing but pain. Can you blame him? Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed. The caller ID made his blood run cold. Victor Delgado. Ethan, my friend. Victor's voice oozed false warmth. I hope you're prepared for tonight's gala. I have a feeling it's going to be quite revealing. As the call ended, Ethan's mind raced. The annual business gala. How could he have forgotten? And what did Victor mean by revealing? Across town, Noah sat in a small cafe, his head bent close to Sofia Delgado's. The daughter of his father's rival had become an unlikely ally in unraveling the mystery surrounding Roberto. You sure about this? Noah's voice was barely above a whisper. Sofia nodded, her dark eyes intense. My father's been digging into Roberto's past for weeks. He thinks exposing him will somehow hurt your family's reputation. Noah's fists clenched. But that's insane. Roberto's done nothing wrong. I know. Sofia's hand covered his, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. But my father, he doesn't care about right or wrong, only winning. As they spoke, neither noticed the figure watching from across the street. Miguel, Roberto's old colleague, observed the young pair with a mixture of concern and resignation. The past, it seemed, was catching up to all of them. Back at the Lancaster estate, Roberto knelt in the garden, his hands working the soil with practiced ease. But his mind was far away, lost in memories of a life long buried. The crunch of gravel announced Ethan's approach. Roberto looked up, unsurprised to see the hard set of the other man's jaw, the accusation in his eyes. Mr. Lancaster. Roberto's voice was calm, belying the turmoil within. I suppose we have much to discuss. Ethan's words came out in a rush, anger and confusion battling for dominance. Who are you? Really? And what are you doing here? Roberto stood slowly, brushing the dirt from his hands. For a moment, Ethan caught a glimpse of the man behind the gardener's mask, the professor, the activist, the man who had lost everything. I am who I've always been, Mr. Lancaster. A man seeking peace, and perhaps a chance to make amends for the mistakes of the past. Ethan's laugh was bitter. Peace. Is that what you call manipulating my son? Turning him against everything I've taught him? Roberto's eyes flashed with a fire Ethan had never seen before. I have taught Noah nothing but the value of hard work, compassion, and seeing the world through eyes unclouded by greed or prejudice. If that goes against your teachings, perhaps it is you who needs to reconsider your values. The two men stood face to face, the garden around them forgotten. The air crackled with tension, years of misunderstanding and prejudice coming to a head. It was Noah's arrival that broke the standoff. He burst into the garden, out of breath and wide-eyed. Dad, Roberto, you need to know. Victor Delgado, he's planning something for tonight's gala. Something about exposing Roberto's past. The color drained from Roberto's face. Ethan's expression hardened, a mix of triumph and uncertainty warring in his eyes. Is it true? Ethan's voice was low, dangerous. Were you really a professor? A political dissident? Roberto's shoulders sagged, the weight of his past visible in every line of his body. Yes, in another life, long ago. As Roberto began to speak, the story of his past unfolded like a dark flower. A respected economist in his home country, he had spoken out against government corruption and human rights abuses. His activism had made him powerful enemies, including the Delgado family, who had profited from the very systems Roberto sought to change. The night of the coup, Roberto's voice was barely above a whisper. I lost everything. My career, my home, my family. I fled with nothing but the clothes on my back and the hope that someday, somehow, I could start anew. Noah listened in stunned silence, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. Ethan's face was a storm of emotions, anger, disbelief, and something that might have been grudging respect. As Roberto's tale came to an end, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the garden. In the gathering twilight, the three men stood in silence, the weight of revelation heavy between them. It was Noah who broke the silence, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and determination. "We have to stop Victor. We can't let him use your past against you like this." Ethan's head snapped up, his business instincts kicking in despite the turmoil of the past few hours. Noah's right. Whatever our personal issues, we can't let Delgado win. Not like this. Roberto shook his head, a sad smile playing at his lips. "Violence and confrontation are not the answer, my friends. They never are." But as the Lancasters argued and planned, Roberto slipped away, unnoticed. He had his own plans for the evening, plans that would change everything. The gala was in full swing when the Lancasters arrived. The glittering crowd of Silicon Valley's elite parted before them, whispers and sidelong glances following in their wake. Ethan's jaw was set, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of Victor Delgado. Noah fidgeted with his tie, feeling out of place among the suits and evening gowns. His eyes met Sophia's across the room, and she gave him a small nod. Whatever happened tonight, at least they were in it together. Victor's voice cut through the murmur of conversation, amplified by the microphone he held. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, I have an announcement to make. One that I'm sure will be of great interest to all of you, especially our friends, the Lancasters." Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. This was it, the moment of truth. But before Victor could continue, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to the entrance, where a figure stood silhouetted against the light from outside. Roberto Mendez stepped into the room, but not as the humble gardener they all knew. He stood tall, dignified, dressed in a suit that spoke of a life long left behind. His eyes swept the room, coming to rest on Victor Delgado. "Mr. Delgado," Roberto's voice carried easily through the stunned silence. "I believe you were about to speak about me. Perhaps it would be better if I told my own story." What followed was a tale that held the room spellbound. Roberto spoke of his life as a professor, of the ideals that had driven him to speak out against injustice. He spoke of the night he lost everything, and of a long, hard road that had led him to find peace in the simple act of tending a garden. But it was his words about the Lancasters that truly captivated the audience. In Ethan Lancaster, I saw a man not unlike myself, driven, ambitious, perhaps too focused on material success. In Noah, I saw the hope for a different future. And in their garden, I found a place to heal, to teach, and to learn. As Roberto spoke, Ethan felt something shift inside him. The anger and resentment that had driven him for so long began to crumble, replaced by a dawning understanding. Victor Delgado, his face twisted with fury, tried to interrupt. "This man is a fraud, a political agitator who—" But his words were drowned out by the crowd's reaction to Roberto's story. Murmurs of sympathy and admiration rippled through the room. Noah stepped forward, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "Roberto Mendez is the most honest, honorable man I know. If anyone here is a fraud, Mr. Delgado, it's you." The room erupted in chaos. Accusations flew, alliances shifted, and in the midst of it all, Ethan Lancaster found himself standing beside the man he had once considered his enemy. As the night wore on, the true nature of Victor Delgado's business dealings came to light. His connection to the coup that had destroyed Roberto's life, the corruption that had lined his family's pockets, it all spilled out in a torrent of revelations. In the aftermath, as the last of the guests trickled out, Ethan found Roberto standing alone on the balcony, gazing out at the city lights. "I owe you an apology." Ethan's voice was gruff with emotion. "I judged you without knowing you, without understanding." Roberto turned, a gentle smile on his face. "We all make mistakes, Mr. Lancaster. The true measure of a man is how he learns from them." As they stood there, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon, Ethan felt a presence at his side. Noah joined them, his young face alight with a newfound wisdom. "So," Noah grinned, "what do we do now?" Ethan looked at his son, then at Roberto, and for the first time in years, he felt a genuine smile tugging at his lips. "I think," he said slowly, "it's time we all did a little gardening." And as the sun rose on a new day, the three men stood together, ready to plant the seeds of a different kind of future, one rooted in understanding, compassion, and the simple wisdom of a man who had found his peace among the flowers. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton buzzed with anticipation. Silicon Valley's elite mingled, their laughter and chatter a stark contrast to the tension coiling in Ethan Lancaster's gut. He scanned the room, searching for any sign of Victor Delgado. "Dad, relax. Your tie is fine." Noah's voice cut through Ethan's thoughts. Ethan's hands dropped from his neck. "It's not the tie I'm worried about." Rachel squeezed his arm. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." The crowd parted, and Victor Delgado strode to the center of the room, a wolfish grin on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, I have an announcement that will shake the very foundations of our business community." Ethan's fists clenched. This was it. Victor's voice dripped with false concern. "It pains me to reveal this, but I believe we have all been deceived. The Lancaster family, pillars of our community, have been harboring a fugitive, a dangerous political dissident." Gasps rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned to Ethan, who stood frozen, his face a mask of shock. Victor continued, relishing every word. "Their trusted gardener, Roberto Mendez, is not who he claims to be. He is a former professor, an agitator who fled his country after inciting violence and unrest." The room erupted in whispers. Ethan felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Everything he had built, his reputation, his legacy, it was all crumbling before his eyes. "That's a lie." Noah's voice rang out, clear and defiant. "Roberto is a good man. He's taught me more about integrity and compassion than—" "No, enough." Ethan's voice was low, defeated. Victor's smile widened. "How touching. The boy defends a criminal. But tell me, Ethan, did you know? Did you knowingly employ a wanted man?" Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He didn't know. He hadn't known. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, more accusatory. Ethan felt the walls closing in, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. And then, a voice cut through the chaos. Calm, steady, filled with a quiet dignity that silenced the room. "Mr. Delgado is correct about one thing. I am not who I claim to be." Roberto Mendez stood in the doorway, his weathered hands clasped before him. Gone was the humble gardener's attire, replaced by a simple but elegant suit. He walked slowly to the center of the room, every eye following his movement. "My name is indeed Roberto Mendez. I was once a professor of economics, and yes, I spoke out against injustice and corruption in my homeland. But I never incited violence. I never sought to harm anyone." Roberto's eyes met Victor's, and for a moment, a flicker of recognition passed between them. The violence came from those who feared the truth, from those who profited from the suffering of others. Victor's face contorted with rage. "You dare." "I dare to speak the truth, Mr. Delgado, something your family has long feared." Roberto's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. "It was your father who orchestrated the coup that destroyed my life, who silenced those who dared to question his methods." The room fell silent, all eyes now on Victor, whose face had drained of color. Roberto continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "I came to this country with nothing but the clothes on my back and the hope for a new beginning. I found that in the Lancaster's garden, in the simple act of nurturing life, I found healing. And in young Noah, I found hope for a better future." Noah stepped forward, standing tall beside Roberto. "Everything Roberto taught me, about hard work, about seeing the beauty in simple things, it made me a better person. If that's a crime, then I guess I'm guilty too." Ethan watched his son, a mix of pride and shame washing over him. How had he been so blind? Victor, sensing the tide turning against him, lashed out. "This is absurd. You're all being fooled by a silver-tongued criminal." Ethan, Surely you can't condone this." All eyes turned to Ethan. The room held its breath, waiting for his response. Ethan looked at Roberto, at Noah, at Rachel. He saw the truth in their eyes, the strength in their unity. And in that moment, he made his choice. "No, Victor, I can't condone lies and manipulation, but they're coming from you, not Roberto." Ethan's voice grew stronger with each word. "I was wrong about many things. I judged a man by his status, not his character. I valued wealth over wisdom, but no more." He turned to Roberto, extending his hand. "I owe you an apology, Roberto, and my deepest thanks." The room erupted in applause. Victor, his face twisted with fury, stormed out, but few noticed his departure. As the night wore on, the truth of Roberto's past and Victor's family's involvement in it came to light. Business alliances shifted, reputations were reassessed, and in the midst of it all, the Lancasters and Roberto stood united. Weeks passed. The media frenzy surrounding Roberto's revelation eventually died down, replaced by a growing interest in his story of resilience and redemption. One sunny afternoon, Ethan found Roberto in the garden, tending to a bed of roses. "I never thanked you properly," Ethan said, kneeling beside him. Roberto smiled, his hands never pausing in their work. "There's no need for thanks between friends." Ethan shook his head, a rueful smile on his face. "Friends. I like the sound of that." They worked in companionable silence, the simple act of nurturing life bringing a peace Ethan had never known in his boardrooms and business deals. "I've been thinking," Ethan said after a while, "about what you said that night, about finding healing in the garden." Roberto nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I want to start a foundation, something to help refugees, people who've lost everything, find that same healing. What do you think?" Roberto's face lit up. "I think it's a wonderful idea, my friend, and I know just the person to help you get started." As if on cue, Noah appeared, a stack of papers in his hand. "Dad, Roberto, you've got to see this." He spread the papers out, printouts of news articles, social media posts, all buzzing about Roberto's story. "People are fascinated," Noah explained, his eyes shining with excitement. "They want to know more about your life, your experiences, your wisdom." Roberto chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm just a simple gardener, Noah. What wisdom could I possibly offer?" Ethan and Noah exchanged a knowing glance. "I think you're selling yourself short, Roberto," Ethan said. "Your story, your journey, it's something people need to hear." Noah nodded eagerly. "You should write a book. Share your experiences, your philosophy. I bet it would be a bestseller." Roberto looked thoughtful, his weathered hands absently stroking a rose petal. "Perhaps, if it could help others find their own path to healing." Months flew by. The Lancaster Foundation for Refugee Empowerment took shape, with Roberto as its heart and soul. And true to Noah's prediction, Roberto's memoir, From Professor to Gardener, Lessons in Humility and Growth, became an overnight sensation. On a crisp autumn evening, the Lancasters and Roberto gathered in the garden to celebrate the book's success. The air was filled with laughter and the scent of blooming flowers. Rachel raised her glass in a toast to new beginnings and the wisdom to recognize them. As they clinked glasses, Ethan looked around at his family, not just Rachel and Noah, but Roberto too. He marveled at how much had changed, how much he had changed. "You know," he said, a mischievous glint in his eye, "I guess I was the one who needed to be weeded out." The garden rang with laughter, warm and genuine. Noah leaned against his father, a contentment in his eyes that Ethan had never seen before. "So, Dad," Noah said, gesturing to the thriving garden around them, "what's next for the Lancaster legacy?" Ethan wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders, his other hand reaching out to clasp Roberto's. "I think, son, it's time we focus on growing something more valuable than money, something that will last long after we're gone." As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant hues, the unlikely family stood together in the garden they had nurtured. Each of them changed, each of them stronger for the journey they had taken together. And in the gentle evening breeze, the flowers swayed, witnesses to the transformative power of compassion, humility, and the simple wisdom found in tending a garden.